Hello, and welcome to Historical World of English, where you'll find the most recent news, entertaining moments, and behind-the-scenes accounts you won't want to miss. The time of the Revolution, from 1754 to 1793, and the history of the United States, from 1776 to 1789. Further information: Boston Tea Party. As part of the larger 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763, was a turning point in the political development of the colonies. The war effort also resulted in greater political integration of the colonies, as reflected in the Albany Congress and symbolized by Benjamin Franklin's call for the colonies to join or die. The influence of the French and Native Americans, the primary rivals of the British Crown in the colonies and Canada, was significantly reduced, and the territory of the 13 colonies expanded into New France, Canada, and Louisiana. King George III issued the Royal Proclamation in 1763 to safeguard Native Americans from colonial expansion west of the Appalachian Mountains and organize the new North American Empire. Strains developed in the relations between the colonists and the Crown. The Stamp Act of 1765 was enacted by the British Parliament without going through the legislatures of the colonies. It imposed a tax on the colonies. Crying, "No taxation without representation," the colonists refused to pay. On March 5, 1770, in what would become known as the Boston Massacre, a violent confrontation between a local mob and British troops in Boston resulted in the deaths of 5 Bostonians and fueled anti-British sentiment throughout the colonies. On December 16, 1773, the Boston Tea Party was a direct action to protest the new tax on tea. Parliament responded the next year with the Intolerable Acts, stripping Massachusetts of its historic right of self-government and putting it under military rule, which sparked outrage and resistance in all 13 colonies. Patriot leaders from every colony convened the First Continental Congress to coordinate their resistance. The Congress published a list of rights and grievances, called for a boycott of British trade, and petitioned the king to address those grievances. The appeal was unsuccessful. American Revolution. American Revolution. The Second Continental Congress voted to declare independence on July 2, 1776. The Declaration of Independence presented arguments in favor of the rights of citizens, stating that all men are created equal, supporting the rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and demanding the consent of the governed. The Founding Fathers were guided by the ideology of republicanism, rejecting the monarchism then dominant in Europe. The Declaration of Independence was signed by members of the Congress on July 4th. This date has since been commemorated as Independence Day. On April 19, 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. The position of General of the Continental Army was given to George Washington. Washington's crossing of the Delaware River marked the beginning of a string of victories that drove British forces out of New Jersey. The British began the Saratoga Campaign in 1777 to capture Albany, New York, as a choke point. After the American victory at Saratoga, France, the Netherlands, and Spain began providing support to the Continental Army. After suffering defeat in the Northern Theater, Britain moved forward in the Southern Theater, beginning with the 1778 capture of Savannah. American forces reclaimed the South in 1781, and a British army was captured at the Siege of Yorktown on October 19, 1781. On December 5, 1782, King George III formally ordered the end of hostilities, recognizing American independence. The Treaty of Paris was signed on September 3, 1783, and ratified on January 14, 1784, by the Congress of the Confederation. Confederation period. Main article: the Confederation era. The United States governing law, the Articles of Confederation, were ratified to give states more power over the federal government. Because the government was unable to pass economic legislation, levy taxes, or pay its debts, this led to a decline in the economy. Nationalists were concerned that the Union's Confederate nature was too fragile to withstand armed conflict with any hostile states or even internal revolts like the Massachusetts Shays Rebellion in 1786. In the 1780s, the western regions were ceded by the states to Congress and became territories. They quickly became states as settlers moved to the Northwest. The American Indian Wars continued in the 1780s as settlers moved west. The Northwestern Confederacy and American settlers began fighting the Northwest Indian War in the late 1780s. The Northwestern Confederacy received British support, but the settlers received little assistance from the American government. In 1787, nationalists, the majority of whom were veterans of the war, organized in every state and persuaded Congress to convene the Philadelphia Convention. The delegates from every state wrote a new constitution that created a federal government with a strong president and powers of taxation. The current Republican ideals of limiting the government's power through separation of powers and guarantees of individual liberty were reflected in the new government. The Constitution was ratified by a sufficient number of states in 1788 to begin forming a federal government.